My name's Jim Dahm. I've been involved here off and on for about 35 years. So, the purpose of my presentation today is update you on the coastal erosion, what we've got, what the most recent working information we have, and some information on where the erosion may go from here, and some of the information for management. And then obviously as council has said, there will be a number of tables where council staff will engage you with regard to private assets, public assets, and so as council really explained it over the region. So without further ado, in terms of an outline of the presentation, I'll demonstrate the erosion. We'll set the scene a wee bit about the setting of this particular site. It's quite important in understanding what we're facing. And then what has happened in the past, and we'll go back beyond the erosion and look over the last 80 years, because that's quite important in understanding what we're currently facing with the erosion. Then we'll have a close look at the erosion period that we've experienced since about 2008, current rate and potential future rate. And then we'll have a very brief look at some of the implications of that erosion. I'm not going to get into the detail of the actions that the tables are for and what they will, but we'll briefly traverse the main options and some of the implications of the findings for that. Most of that discussion on management won't be new to you, but I understand there's been quite a lot of discussion around these matters over the last 3 or 4 years. So in terms of the setting, this is a very high wave energy coast. Wide, low gradient sandy beaches, basically a lot of things happen can happen to get considerable wave energy and forces operating here. And while Port Waikato is quite a big system in and of itself, it's actually an interconnected part of a much larger system. And that's really a key thing to understand in terms of understanding what's going on here at Port Waikato. Sand is basically making its way from Taranaki all the way to North Cape. And it's passing through when it arrives at Port Waikato. This is not a final destination, this is a through point on the way. And so that's really quite important for a small part of a very large interconnected sand system. The waves on this coast tend over time, while sand moves both ways up and down the coast, the net movement over time is to the north, and it's quite a strong net movement. But that sand doesn't seem, the basic science of this coast is still to be done, but the sand doesn't appear to be, the sand often appears, to travel in slugs. So we often get a pulsive sediment, which might last decades in some cases, and the shoreline can go out quite a long way when a pulsive sediment arrives, and then as that pulsive sediment picks up its speed and moves on, your shoreline can come back a long way. So those pulses of different sizes, as you go further down toward Taranaki, they tend to be a bit smaller. As you get up to the north, there's some quite large pulses. Most of you will be aware the spotted blue was the cliff coastline in the 1800s, and now there's about 2 kilometres of sand in front of it, with the large pulse of sediment across the Manukau Harbour and right there. And that pulse of sediment also making its way north, causing sea harbour build out. And this is the last decade or so it's reached Muriwai, and now the south end of Muriwai, which is building out. So this is a coast where you tend to get these quite large slugs or slightly sliders and sediment often travels. We don't know why. We suspect it's due to obstacles like headlands, river entrances, and so forth that hold the sand up for a while, then it bypasses the obstacles. But until the fundamental science is done, we don't know the basic cause. But associated with those large movements, the shorelines can experience quite significant changes over time scales of centuries. Now, I don't imagine anyone has been here for 700 or 800 years, but if you had been here for 700 or 800 years, you would know this is one of the most dynamic places on the west coast between Taranaki and North Cape. There are very few places that are more dynamic than Port Waikato. There's a chap called Percy Smith who was recording some stories from Walter Wiley, and they were telling him that probably late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a huge sand flat between the Waikato River entrance, which was getting closer to the village, and Manukau Harbour, and it was a 3-day walk around into that sand flat to get to the North Waikato entrance. And by the late 1800s, of course, it was very similar to now, although the entrance was closer to the village, it's only a 1-day walk. And that big pulse of sand disappeared, all those flats where they used to eel and so on, and Kanuku, when everyone had disappeared. Subsequently, we know it across Manukau Harbour. 1800s, there were huge changes in Manukau Harbour, and in the 1900s, we got the colossal volumes arriving in Whakatu, and those colossal volumes moved north. So, certainly, Port Waikato is a place where it has seen a lot of changes. I'm going to focus at the moment on the last 80 years, because that's the most relevant to the erosion, but just to understand this is a place that has been very dynamic over a long period of time. So, what the shoreline photograph shows you here is a 1970s aerial photograph with the 1940 shoreline mapped in yellow, superimposed on it. And so you can see between the 1940s and the time of the photograph, the spit had grown quite markedly. If I can use this but you can see how there's quite a lot of accretion along here. The shoreline fronting the township and the spit has built up, and the spit has extended during that period. So the shoreline actually built out during that particular period, by about 70 to 80 metres in front of the township. And this particular photograph shows that same 1940 shoreline in yellow. It shows the 2007 shoreline, and you can see at that stage the shoreline that we're just showing you in 1970, which is built out here, and 2007, which is the bottom white line, that shoreline was still well seaward of where it is now. It was still pretty much where it was in the 1960s and 70s. But since 2007, it's eroded back. And the photograph underneath is more recent, beginning of this year, and you can see just how far the shoreline has come back. And it's not just in front of the township, it's along the entire ocean shoreline of the spit. And in addition to that erosion, of course, there's been erosion going on the landward side of the river comes into the spit that extends along. So quite significant changes. Zeroing in on the township, you can see here, again, those changes in a bit more detail around the township. There's the 1942 shoreline. It built out in the 1970s. It was still way out here in 2007, and subsequently it's gone back. Early 2004, that back line wasn't quite back to 1942. With the recent erosion, which I'll show you in the next photograph, it's now very close to that 1942 shoreline at present. So, you can see where the shoreline from the car park is now. So, what does that look like over time? I'm happy to see that. I'll try to put a line in to connect them. Basically, so basically, in the shoreline, that shoreline was looked at from 1942 to the 1960s, it advanced by 70 to 80 metres, something like 70 metres. It may have started advancing before 1942, we just have snapshots, so we don't know that it started in 42, it may have been further back before that. From the 60s, 1960s to 2008, about 46, 47 years, there were some fluctuations, but basically the shoreline remained well advanced from 1940, about 60 to 70 metres seaward before we do the Pacific. And then subsequently from 2008 to the present, we've had rapid erosion, and we're now at the soil before just seaward of the 42 shoreline position. And as I said, that scale of that erosion is really consistent along the whole 300 kilometre length of the ocean. The causes of those changes are not certain, but it has the appearance of a large slug or pulse of sediment moving past. A pulse of sediment arriving, causing the shoreline to go out, sitting there for some time, and then moving on. That's the best understanding that we have. As I say, the fundamental science is not done. Nearby was painted in the 90s, but the fundamental is like that. Port Waikato County will focus in now and look more closely at the erosion that we've seen in recent years. So that is the erosion from 2007 back to present. Bear in mind that most of this erosion is coming into shoreline that had built up since the 1940s. It wasn't there. It's only in recent, the last few weeks, that the shoreline got back to where it was in 1940. So, I'll just quickly take you through, those of you who are familiar, I'll just take you through a few photographs that I took those time from 2002, so you just get a feel for the scale of them. Some people will outline the graphs, some people prefer prefer photographs. You can see there the upper and lower car park. The lower car park had a dune in front of it in 2002, and you see the surf top tower, all still pretty much the same, 2006. January 2008, all still pretty much in situ. So by the end of that year, we started to see the first cut of erosion. But strangely, while we had a small hit at that time, the shoreline then settled down, and actually the dune was rebuilt by humans in 2009. But there's also some natural dune repair at that time. So it sort of rebuilt a little bit in 2011, and it's after then it's really taken on. So before I go to the next photograph, fix your eyes. Sorry, I can't use the pointing there. Fix your eyes on this part here, because that disappears in the next slide. Okay, and then May 2013, and then 2014, pretty much the same. What's the lower part here, the lower car park, and the place with the median item there with the tires, and that disappeared by this. So that is on by 2019, and of course now we're right back into that other car park. So it's quite significant erosion. When you look at the rate of change over time, which is quite interesting as well, and for reasons I'll explain later, you can see it's fairly stable out here. And then minor blip of erosion in 2008, shoreline went back out again. Then all of a sudden we had an erosion phase where it went back about 25 metres in a couple of years. Then you can see a quiet period of a couple of years where the shoreline hardly changed at all. Then another erosion phase and coincidentally very close to 20-25 metres of erosion again. Then another quiet phase in here, and since then we've had another 20 to 25 metres of erosion. So we seem to have these phases or pulses of erosion, followed by quiet periods, and then another period of erosion. However, when you basically plot it out on the graph and fit linear line to it, you can see despite those pulses, phases of erosion, the quiet periods, phases of erosion, quiet periods, despite that changing nature, basically the average rate of erosion has remained, the time average rate of erosion has remained fairly consistent. That's about 4 metres per year over that period, which is a very fast rate of coastal erosion for net coastal erosion for a standing shoreline. That's very rapid erosion. And it's remained relatively consistent over the whole period until recently, despite those ups and downs. And so, for reasons I'll explain shortly, we think that if you're projecting for the future, that's probably something you can use as a worst case. But you can only use it if you're looking at periods for beyond 5 years, because remember the erosion occurs in pulses, so you can get more than 5 metres in 1 year, but over 5 years you're not likely to get much more than 20 metres. So looking at 5 years or more, work on 4 metres per year. If you're working on less, work on, you have to monitor and be aware whether you're in an erosion phase or whether you're in a quiet phase between the erosion. However, as I say, that's probably the worst case for the future, because you can also, when you look at the data, that's a very good fit by the way, for those of you who are familiar with statistics at the R-squared value of 0.96, one is almost a perfect fit, so it's a very good fit with the data. But also, however, it does, and this tells a completely different story. This fit, which is an exponential fit, basically suggests the erosion might be decreasing, which is better news than the last graph, because the last graph says it's basically going into the future at 4 metres per year. This graph says, well, that might be wrong, it might actually be decreasing over time. But even with this graph, which is also a good fit design, you see the R-squared value very similar. So both of them are feasible scenarios, both of them are plausible projections. We don't make predictions in science, we have data that are crystal ball, and we can project historic data into the future, which we're doing. And so if you put trends to the erosion, you can get a good fit with this one, which suggests a decrease. You can get a good fit with the linear, which suggests it might be going much the same. But even if it's decreasing, which would be the good news option, this curve, if you extrapolate it into the future, suggests we could still easily have 18 to 20 metres erosion by 2050. So it's a lot less than the 4 metres per year, but it would still be significant. Now, let's go to the next graph, which is got both lines on together. Slides, this is the data. These are just best 15 line for projections. They're not projections, they're projections. So sometimes you have data, you have so these are projections. Either of these projections, this is probably the worst case, or longer term, this is probably the most likely test case. We can't rule out that there's something less that it suddenly comes roaring to a stop. We can't rule that out. But all we can say at this point in time is there's no evidence that's going to occur. So, because we don't understand the fundamental drivers, we can't rule it out. But in the data, this really suggests these are the best plan for the moment. We can hope for the best, but we really need to plan for the scenario. The chances of something much worse are pretty slim. Because erosion like this tends over time to decrease. So I'd be very surprised that it showed a significant increase on the historic erosion. But at this point in time, the data gives us two possible scenarios for the future, or predictions for the future. Probably a best case, a worst case based on present knowledge that we can use for planning to adapt to the management strategy. So, summary. We had rapid erosion about 70 metres since 2008, and that's been a similar scale right along the ocean shore under the slip. The erosion has occurred in phases, where you get quite significant retreat. You can get 25 metres in a couple of years, that's quite significant, and then with quiet periods in between. And the average rate of erosion is still high, so it may be decreasing. One of the scenarios, as I said, is that it's decreasing. Future predictions. They're projections, not predictions. They're based on extrapolating past trends. We can't help with predictions. But most likely is that the erosion will continue at the same rate, at the same time average rate that it has for the last 15 to 17 years, about 4 metres per year. It will probably occur in phases of erosion where you get more than that in quiet phases. The best likely case suggests that the erosion is decreasing over time, but even with that best likely case, we could be looking at 15 to 20 metres more erosion by 2050. So it's not good news. We are still finalising these projections in figures like graphs. We're trying to find some more photos, more data points there. The better fit we can decide which of those two lines might be the more accurate. If we can't sort that out with more data, then the monitoring over the next 3 to 5 years should tell us which one of those lines is more accurate. Because if you look at those lines again, you can see that starting getting shorelines at the bottom here, you're going to be thinking it's going that line. Starting data dropping in here, it's going to be pretty obvious that it's probably going the other line. Just it's been a very steep erosion today, and so it's very hard to pick from the data between those two scenarios. One question before we move on from erosion. Apparently some folk have been concerned that if the erosion continues, it will eliminate the high dune in front of the township, and then you might get quite serious wave flooding in the township. Categorically no, that won't occur, and it won't occur for a number of reasons. First of all, experience of serious erosion on other sites, and I'll show you a couple of slides shortly, indicates that the high dune is likely to come back with the eroding shoreline. And I'll show you an example, unless humans prevent it from doing so. And second, if it doesn't come back to the shoreline, it's very easy to form a dune with machinery to make sure that you're protected from the township itself is protected from coastal flooding. So the erosion is the issue, not the coastal flooding. But when you're planning, the only but around this is when you're planning for the medium long-term future, if the erosion does go right through the high dune and starts to get adjacent to the low dune, you also have to allow not just for what erosion might occur, but also for enough space to build a protective dune for the township behind that shoreline. That's the only good way to go around it. And here's an example from Little Wide. Little Wide was actively eroding until about 2010, 2011, from about 1950. We had quite serious erosion there. They had what they called the northern car parks, and they were temporary car parks, so they just had base built down, and as the shoreline got back to the car park, they abandoned it and moved it down. So you can see here, this is quite a big one in 2001. Here's a former car park surface, there's people parking, and you can see by the time the shoreline got back, there was a bit of a dune above the car park. And here's another view of the same car park in 2006, and you can see the sort of dune that came back with the shoreline. Bear in mind that under this dune is a former car park that has been moved in. So and the front, the seaward face of those dunes is no vegetation on, so if the wind hit the dunes, the blue sand up over the top, the dunes will be like the migrating land. You can see some of the sand here that keep them moving on the car parks and eventually car park. So, and if that doesn't happen, you can do it. Right, brief implications, just touch briefly on the implications for management and for management options. Obviously, we have an analysis, and I hope you've been used to everybody in this room. I think one of the reasons why we've got the turnout today, obviously, everyone's aware that appropriate action is now getting very urgent. We've already had some private assets, houses and property that are impacted, and others are likely to be impacted in the near future, including 3 houses. The car park has already been severely impacted, as you saw those photographs, and as you can see in the erosion, and is now barely viable. This wonderful facility and the surf club and the hub could also be potentially threatened. They could, in the worst case erosion, they could potentially be threatened in the next 5 or 6 years, but the best case would be much longer. So obviously we'll set up a monitoring system because no one wants to relocate these facilities unless you have to, and so we'll build that later on. So part of going forward, we'll build a monitoring system so you can set triggers for when that action is occurred. Now obviously the main implication is that we've got quite significant uncertainties. We've got 2 different potential erosion scenarios which have quite different implications for planning. And so you need an adaptive management type approach where you can basically alter your plan according to what happens. We'll talk about adaptive management on the next slide. And James has got a very good fact sheet for it if you want a bit more detail. The other thing that this serious problems like this require is a strong partnership approach with all parties sitting around the table. And for reasons that I'll touch on, we've got the central government as well as other parties around the table. In my opinion, this is by far the most serious erosion problem we're currently dealing with in New Zealand. And it's a very, very difficult problem for a team to deal with. A high energy coastline that's coming back at this tremendous rate with these sorts of assets in the way. We need very good partnerships and very good plans to ensure we get to that. There has been a little bit of confusion between adaptive management and managed retreat. Just to make it clear, adaptive management is about how we make decisions. It's a decision-making process. Managed retreat was one of the options that you look at in that decision-making process. So when we talk about adaptive management, we're not talking about managed retreat, it's one of the options you're looking at, but you're talking about having an adaptive management approach. And basically, adaptive management is a flexible decision-making process that enables you to adjust your plan according to keep it live and to adjust as circumstances change. And you can form a plan for different scenarios. You can form a plan for that worst case erosion scenario. You can form a plan for a best case scenario. And if you want to, you can even form a plan for a more extremely optimistic scenario. But as long as you cover all the bases, then you know going forward, whatever happens, you can adapt your plan to fit the circumstances you're facing. And those are based on the best present knowledge, around erosion, which is just outlined, but more importantly around community aspirations, what you want to achieve in your community, which is why the council is placing a big emphasis on doing that through engagement in regard to both public and private assets. The other thing about adaptive management, I say, it's flexible. You have a monitoring program and it goes alongside it, and so you're monitoring what's happening to the shoreline and you're adjusting your plan with that. So that's what adaptive management is about. I won't touch on managed retreat, but you can touch on it later on. Now, I'm going to go over the options very briefly because talking to Rick and others, there's obviously been a lot of discussion in recent years. You've had reports prepared by GHB, by ECOAST and others looking at options, so I'm not going to be moving around with you on over. But basically, as I understand it, the conclusion you've reached, and I think you would concur with this, is that if the erosion continues at this site, you're literally down to 2 options. One is holding the line with temporary measures or more permanent measures, and I'll talk about that option shortly, and the other is managed retreat, which can be managed retreat or unmanaged retreat. I won't talk about unmanaged retreat. No one else wants to see unmanaged retreat. If you want to see what unmanaged retreat looks like, look up a place called Rodanthi, R-O-D-A-N-T-H-E, Rodanthi from the eastern United States. That's a textbook example of managed retreat. And if you search on Google and you look for images, you'll see why we don't want to go down that road. So I won't be talking about unmanaged retreat, we'll be talking about managed retreat when we talk about retreat. In terms of focus first on holding the line and looking at the implications of the erosion for that. Now, first look at temporary options. Obviously this can include options such as temporary structures, such as the resilience group is currently looking at. Under some circumstances, you can also do push-ups. Now, these temporary measures are not intended to permanently stop the erosion. All they are about is trying to buy time for a particular purpose. So they're short-term measures. Now, given the forces that you've got to work here on this coast and the rapid nature of the erosion, even temporary options are really difficult and can be really expensive. So on this coast, while the erosion continues, those measures are also likely to have a very short design life. And particularly the design life will be short if you're trying that option during an erosion phase. Remember we talked through how the erosion occurs in phases, and then there's a quiet period in between. If you're trying to put your temporary or short-term measure in during an erosion phase, it will have a very short design life. So often where you can, take the quiet periods in between. You don't always get that choice. So, given the difficulty of temporary options, use them judiciously. They form part of your adaptive plan, I understand they will do. Then make sure they're only for short-term purposes, because on a coast like that, that's only going to last a short period of time. Be very clear about the purpose and the need. Make sure that you have a very clear purpose of what you're doing, there's a very clear need. You are going to achieve something, otherwise avoid, because otherwise you could waste a lot of money. So maybe, for example, we've got a present structure that might need relocation, and say it's a house, and the relocation firm arrives and says, hey, look, there's not enough room in front of the house for me to safely get my equipment around there to relocate. You might want to do a push-up to create a sand ramp and to make that more stable for this machinery to operate. Obviously, you have to do that very quickly, and you have to for that short-term period. So pick your conditions. It will be easier and cheaper and last longer if you do these temporary measures in quiet conditions. And if you must do such work during an erosion phase, try to pick a period in a suitable way and try to condition the forecast in relatively calm conditions, relatively small times. So if you have to do some push-up on a short-term measure, it's likely to last all the purposes and work quickly to achieve purposes, because the chances are the short-term option may not be there very long if you're unlucky. Looking at more permanent measures, obviously in the last 100 years, holding the line has been how we've tended to manage erosion for a whole bunch of reasons that I won't go into. We're truly moving away from that. But that's how most people are used to managing erosion. Successful management equals stopping erosion and the historic approach to this. Now, if you were going to try and hold the line more permanently at this site, given the forces that you're up against, the wave energy on this coast, and given the rapid rate of retreat, you're talking about a well-engineered seawall. And that's about that. I know people have mentioned nourishment and groins and reefs, 40, 50 times more expensive. You could buy the houses 4 or 5 times over for the cost of those options, and they would be very difficult options to make practical at this site. Pretty much, if you're trying to hold the shoreline, you'd be pretty much down to a rigorously engineered seawall. Now, that option, unfortunately, has quite significant complications. Firstly, it's very difficult for the engineer to design because of the uncertainties around future erosion, and I'll show you a graphic explaining why that is short, diagram, I should say. So the engineer will design it for specific design conditions. Probably what the engineer would do, he would look at your worst case and he'd say, well, do you want a design life of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and then he would say, for your worst case erosion, this is I'm designing for a design life of X number of years. And that, because of the uncertainty, you have to make those kinds of qualifications. And that design life could be very short, for reasons I'll show on a sketch shortly. And it will also be very expensive. These structures have to contain very considerable forces. And if you're on a retreating shoreline, the engineer has to design them not for the forces the wall would currently experience, but for the forces that it's going to experience within the design life. So if you're trying to hold, let me say, look, if we want at least a 10-year design life, you probably more than that, but you minimum 10 years, which in the worst case would be 40 metres retreat. The engineer would draw a scour profile for 40 metres retreat, and he would design the wall for those conditions. Otherwise, if you got those conditions, the wall would fall over before the design line is reached. So, and to hold those kind of forces, you could do a very large 15 to 30,000 per metre, and this you can get the design line. In addition to those complications, if the erosion continued, you have major adverse effects. And the reason for that is that seawalls have the biggest problem in the environment with seawalls is when the shoreline is retreating. Because what a seawall does, it protects what's behind the wall. It doesn't change what's going on in front of the wall. So yes, if you've got a well-engineered seawall, you can hold your car park or whatever else you're protecting, but the beach in front of that will be retreating into your wall. So as long as the erosion continues, your beach will be narrowing. And I'll give you an example. For instance, as we talked about here, the shoreline's come back to about 70 metres in the last few years, 7 or 80 years. So if you come down here at low tide on a nice calm day with a 100 metre tape, and you measure out, say, 70 metres, and you say, well, we built the wall back in 2008 to hold the shoreline where it is, this is where the wall would be, and then have a look at how much beach is in front of you, because that's all the beach you would have left. All the beach behind you would be gone. And so basically you would only have a beach probably for the lowest parts of the tide. And it would also be very difficult to get down from the car park to that beach because you've got waves against the wall at the time. So that's the problem. Quite significant effects on beach work, quite significant effects on public access and use on a retreating shoreline. And this diagram here illustrates those effects as well. US Army for years. I tend to use this diagram because US Army for years is a reputation for trying to hold the shoreline. Now, on a non-protected beach, this is just a sketch, of course. If you're undergoing a retreat, the whole profile retreats landward. So you still have, as long as you're eroding into sand, you still have a beach. You can go back 40, 50, 60 metres. If parts of the states have gone back 200 or 300 metres over the last couple of centuries, you still have a beach. If, however, you put a well-engineered seawall, and this is just a sketch, and obviously not anything as flimsy as that, would be a sloping wall to go down to this. But if you put a seawall in, and it's effective, it's well-engineered, you protect what's behind it. You don't change the fact that the shoreline in front of the road. So over time, that beach narrows. So you're holding what's behind the wall, you're not holding what's behind. But that's the problem on the shoreline. Romati is obviously a classic example. There's a seawall. That's not any longer a retreating shoreline, because they're holding the shoreline well seaward where it wants to be. And so if you look at, if you go to the same stage of tide, if you go down to QET Park right next door, the same tide as the waves are against the shoreline, you've still got a big wave at the beach at QET Park. Whereas this particular location, you've only got a beach for a short period of time. And obviously that period, as the shoreline continues to retreat, that period will be less. The design problems is this thing. This is just a sketch showing a typical sort of 140 gradient, dual gradient period with just a sketch. So here you might be your present shoreline in blue for the Pacific Bank, and you decide to hold it, so you put a well-engineered seawall in. The engineer would say to the engineer, well, we only want a 5-year design period, so he designed for 5 years at 4 metres per year, which is a 20 metre retreat, and so he uses a scour profile, which is something like this, what the profile would look, and then he works out what sort of wave height would occur and break on his wall at that time. He'd pick his rock size, he'd work out how deep it's going to place the scour, and make sure his wall goes down far enough that it could be undermined, and he looked at how big the waves are that are going to be breaking on it. They've got very good formula now after Eurotop and what have you, to work out how far the waves would run up the wall, and then he was designed to do. And it's not a simple process. The rock manual was about that thick. People think designing rock walls is a simple process, and I had gone through Waikato rock manual the other day. I couldn't see applications anywhere near as complex as this. So this is quite a complex thing, even for a skilled engineer to apply, most certainly not. But that's a sketch which illustrates some of the issues they would face, even for a relatively minor design line. And of course, In 5 years' time, the beach level would be here, which is about a metre lower, so you wouldn't be getting any beach in front of your wall until an hour or two, probably 2 hours after high tide. So the other thing that we do in the middle line is when you get that situation, waves are breaking against the wall, it's also very difficult to maintain beach access flows. And for Southern Carpa, they have really to do that until we do language. Okay, so that's all I want to say about that option. Managed retreat. So the erosion has quite significant, a retreating shoreline, a high energy retreating shoreline, is quite inhibiting for a rock solution. For the managed retreat, obviously they involve relocation of assets away from vulnerable areas. It's not a popular option. I remember a councillor telling me in the 1990s, I used to work for a regional council for a while, and we were joking with Richard and I said, Jim, if you're ever going to manage retreat at a public meeting, make sure you've got a helicopter outside of the road. It's not a popular, a very difficult option. People like things the way they are. You don't want the cost and the difficulty of changing. It's a very challenging option. It involves a lot of options we're very experienced. So usually it involves a bigger implementation, so the relocation only occurs if it is totally necessary. It is very clever and fixing triggers, particularly when you've got erosion that occurs in phases and you get quite a lot of short term. So you've got to be very wise, particularly you can't just bury your head 80% of the speed. But even though the option is very difficult and not very popular, in the right settings it can be effective and it's quite commonly being used now and it's likely to be very widely used long term in climate change for a whole bunch of reasons. The difficulty for us is that it raises all kinds of complications, particularly for private property, around compensation, property rights, buyouts, land exchanges, and then we've been pushing central governments for years to get onto this and basically talk about it. They put out this sort of very general sort of talking documents, but just give us no particular guidelines. So I think we'll be putting the acid on them. We know that they've done some quite good work around the Christchurch earthquake, figuring out where they need to move away from or where they don't, where they rent run, where they don't. We know that the flooding in Hawke's Bay, they've done a lot of work about where they do buyouts and where they let people carry on occupying and so forth. And we're probably, part of this job, pushing them quite hard to give us some guidelines for coastal erosion. Because coastal erosion, we just don't get good guidelines as to what happens. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well later. But there's different considerations and complications with this option for both public and private assets. You've been through these issues, I'm just going to summarise them. Obviously, in terms of the public assets, there's a very strong preference in this community for public assets to stay where they are. They're more practical, that's what I've been told. They're more practical. The surf club knows this area, they can move it safely. If they had to move to another location, obviously it becomes a lot more difficult to work out what's going on the routes and keeping the public safe. You've got your assets, you want to look at the facilities already here. So you're not going to be moving these things unless you actually can. However, that's becoming increasingly difficult. Car parks already last more, and if the erosion continues for over the last 70 years, which of course is the worst case scenario, other assets could easily moved within the next 5 years. Obviously, the better case scenario, it might be much longer. If the erosion markets are slow or stop, it might be practicable to stay, but as I say, there's no evidence we're going to see a miraculous stopping anytime soon. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, I'm just saying there's no evidence. Nature's not saying it's the information that's real. So capital management plan is really required. You need to consider worst likely as well as best likely scenarios. Council will be engaging with you on that. Glenn's got a table over here to talk about the public assets and you can debate that later on. And the good thing is that at this site there are viable options for public assets if needed. These things have been covered in the previous report. So I have discussed in the week, so I'm not going to go over them, but obviously Council will be talking to you in detail about the preferences there. And so if you need to go, the preferred relocation to go, the preferred relocation sites are identified, you know where you're going to, the quite various according to the assets. You have appropriate triggers for relocation to make sure it can be done effectively, and that needs to allow for practically flexibility so the assets can be moved to the high. And also needs to allow for strategic erosion, including those policy states, so not be before. and any funding, private funding, consenting, etc. needs to be thought through. So you have a plan for best case, worst case. If you want to get a plan for an extremely optimistic case, but you just need to plan for worst as well as best case scenarios. In terms of, and Glenn will be managing over here behind us, with the hand up, Glenn's managing that process, and you've got a table there to discuss, and you'll be engaging going forward on those. You'll be engaging with them.
Excuse me, can you keep the mic up?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me? My apologies. In terms of private assets, managed retreats are a very difficult option, particularly because we don't have good guidelines around what's involved in compensation, buyouts, land exchanges, those kinds of things which might mitigate the impact of private landowners. And that's something we're going to be pushing very hard to get better guidance on. One positive, it's a positive, but still a difficulty. Most of the sections are deep sections, so a lot of them do have space for retreat, so it provides an option while there's still space. But even with that, there's significant complications in place for landowners. Obviously the relocation costs. Some buildings are difficult to relocate, some buildings are possible to relocate, and maybe need to be replaced, which will increase the cost. There's disruption and rearrangement of services, sewerage, water, electricity, those kinds of things, landscaping, driveways. It's quite a big deal for a landowner to face. And in some cases there are consenting requirements, I'll talk more about those in the next slide, and there are often other significant issues for some owners. So it's a really difficult option, and understand that the owners are reluctant to relocate until it's necessary. And of course there are longer term uncertainties, particularly as you get to some of the more southern properties. The question is, will relocation solve the problem or just delay it? If the erosion keeps going, it might well be that some of those properties will become incapable of reasonable use. And what happens then? That's why early in the process we'll be pushing central government for some guidelines on this, saying, look, can we look at land exchanges? What sort of compensation? What sort of buyouts are possible? What sort of things can we do that can mitigate the impact on this project? Yes, Council will be working with landowners to assist this process. There is a table over there to do with the landowners. We really would like to hear from landowners as to what they feel Council can do to help them in the process. Obviously, Council has already had some discussions. It's looking at options to simplify and streamline consenting and later requirements to make that process the least time consuming and costly as they can. They're providing updated information on erosion, and we'll assist you on setting up a monitoring network. We strongly suggest that we set up some monitoring on those properties, at least on some properties, they may have the south end, north end, in the middle, so you can keep on top of the erosion for your planning. There will be a steering group to work through the issues with landowners. There's a meeting next Saturday with landowners to discuss their issues in detail with them. And we will also be pushing central and regional government in terms of what we think, what can we offer people longer term if push comes to shove and managed retreat actually becomes abandoned, which is a horror story. We hope it doesn't get to that, but if it gets to that, we want to know what's involved. Right, so a bit of a summary, very complex and difficult issue. In my opinion, and I've worked with coastal erosion now for 35 years, I've worked with coastal erosion for a period of time. I've got probably the most difficult coastal erosion issue in New Zealand. In my opinion, it's definitely the most difficult coastal erosion issue we're currently working on in New Zealand. It's a very hard issue for a community and our local council to solve by themselves. They will need other partners. It's a very high energy coastline. It's experiencing large scale and rapid shoreline retreat, and those are major, and there's a lot of uncertainty around future erosion. We've given some scenarios, but they're worst case and best case, and the worst case is not pretty, and even the best case is quite difficult. And while better outcomes might occur, we can all pray for miracles, but there's no presently further evidence that we're in line for one. The best and worst cases suggested by the evidence seem to suggest quite a lot more erosion. If the erosion continues, it poses significant risk to both public and private assets, as we've outlined, and some assets have already been affected. And the only option, if it continues, is likely to be managed retreat at some point, and that is a really complex and difficult option, and we will need to talk to other parties, particularly regional and central government, about how we
we manage that to ensure we get a good and fair outcome, a fair outcome we can get for people in there. So, and of course, as I mentioned, the uncertainties around this mean that an adaptive management approach and partnerships are absolutely critical, and the council's not only applying adaptive management to this site, it's looking at that approach right over its entire district. So, thanks very much for that. Thanks.